Thanks for being here, Jess. You are the owner of Yoga Heights, which has 2 studios in the area. I would love to just hear a little bit about you and your story and how Yoga Heights came to be.
The short story is that I came to DC and thought I was going to be a government wonk, and did that for a few years. Quickly realized that was not making me happy or fulfilled in any kind of way. And then I took a yoga teacher training thinking like, oh, well, this will just be a nice hobby, a nice distraction. And I completely fell in love with it.
Before you decided to open a studio and do your teacher training, had you been doing like yoga for years and years, or were you relatively new?
I honestly didn't even really like yoga that much. The few yoga classes I had taken were really boring. They were like, fall asleep in them kind of yoga. And I hadn't ever really experienced the more like vigorous, sweaty, power flow, twist and let the sweat drip down your face type of yoga. When I stumbled into that is when it really kind of like clicked that, oh, this is what I need. And I think for so many people in DC, they can relate to that. Like sitting in your cubicle at work all day, life is frustrating, work is hard, you're stressed out, and you really like just live in your head. Everything is just so thoughtful and policy oriented, and it's all up here. So doing yoga got me down into my body. And I see that happen for people in DC a lot.
What are the specific ways that it can help people now that we're all home all the time?
I love yoga because it can be so many things and so different for so many people. For me, I need that burn and the fiery energy of a sweaty, powerful, strong, moving class. For others, it's a chance to stop and slow down. One of the things is that it's one thing that feels still a little bit normal. You get on your mat and you breathe and you do down dog, and it's the same down dog, as before times. It offers people that self-care, that moment of like, I finally get to pay attention to me for this next few minutes. And that's like hitting the reset button. It's energizing, it's soothing and calming. It relieves stress and anxiety. And I mean, it's therapy. It's a form of therapy for people, for sure.
Our at-home routine has changed a couple times in the past year. What tips do you have? Because I always find it when the routine changes, you're basically starting over.
So I think letting go of expectations, letting go of this idea that like, well, I have to change my clothes, I have to roll out my mat, I have to do it for 60 minutes. All of that is not true. Yoga can happen in the moments in between. It can happen like maybe you just got dinner on the table, your kids are eating and they're happy, and you want to take 10 minutes by yourself in the other room. Go do that. Should you be fortunate enough to have more time, then, toss in a few down dogs or a sun salutation, or go to the internet. There is infinite yoga on the internet. Obviously, I would like you to go to yogaheightsdc.com, but there's just so much out there. Personally, I know that I have been able to thrive in, not necessarily in yoga, but in working out by publicly stating it. It like holds me accountable. Last month in February, I said, I'm going to hold handstands for 1 minute. Just like putting it out there, and no one really cares. My 200 followers, they don't really care. But by saying it out loud, it made it real, and I held myself accountable to that. Sometimes we'll just plop down right in the middle of the living room and do a few moves and stretches, and my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old love getting in there with me. It's a great way to connect and play. So they're seeing the example, like, oh, look, mommy's taking care of herself. Mommy's doing this thing. And then they might join in or make their own little version of it. Like a 2-year-old's down dog doesn't necessarily look like a 36-year-old's down dog, but it can be a really nice way to let them join in with you.
One of the things that I've missed most is actually going to the studio, being in the studio with other people and feeling that sense of community. And I think that's one of the things that yoga studios specifically are really great at. How do you do that? And how have you adapted it for COVID when we can't all be in the studio together?
I don't know that we've, cracked the code in any perfect way of doing it, but little things like when we're starting a class, taking the 10 minutes before, and even if it's on Zoom, like looking at people and talking to people and inviting them to unmute themselves and turn on their camera, making it feel like the studio experience as much as possible. And then we've really leaned into encouraging people to have a buddy. And so whether it was offering a discount if you signed up for boot camp with a friend, because, having that person on the days, especially when you're like, oh, I don't feel like it, having that person who's going to be like, okay, come on, but really, let's do it, motivates people. Now that the sun is shining and the weather is getting nicer, we'll start classes outdoors again. And then the magic is there. It's in person and still, following all the safety precautions. But there's just a sort of magic that happens when you're in yoga in person.
For people who feel like they've lost their yoga community, especially, what things can they do? Obviously, spring is coming. Being able to go to classes outside is a great opportunity. What can they do to start feeling connected again? Giving
yourself space and freedom and permission to not be the same as it was. And so maybe now community is a much like smaller, more nurturing thing. Whereas before, maybe like you got that community vibe from being around 50 people. Now, how do you connect with just the one or two people and make that like really meaningful? Sort of examining that and considering those relationships.
What's your favorite yoga pose and your ideal workout?
It's kind of an overlooked transition pose that people don't often think about is the halfway lift, or Ardha Uttanasana, when you're doing your sun salutations. We'll see if I can show you this one. And it's not fancy and it's not upside down or crazy, but what it does is stretches out your spine and it opens up your chest and it stretches the hips and the hamstrings, and it just feels so good. But then also I've been weightlifting kind of like with small weights and working out in ways that I never liked before. And I've sort of fallen in love with that this year. Because I think your body just needs variety. There are movements that yoga almost never does. And so it complements it nice to do some like HIIT or boot camp or other things where you build strength in different ways. So I've been really enjoying that. I work with a trainer, Eve, at Mad Fitness over in Tacoma as well. And I love them. And I want to give a shout out to Mad Fitness.
How can we come to Yoga Heights? How can we connect with Yoga Heights? Where can we find you to sort of start building practice and community?
We are at yogaheightsdc.com, and we're all over social media, also Yoga Heights DC on Instagram and Facebook. Our physical locations are not open for classes yet, but they will be. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, everyone gets your vaccines. Let's go. So our physical locations are in Tacoma at 255 Carroll Street and down on Georgia Avenue at 3506 Georgia Ave. This spring and summer, as soon as we can, we'll be outside. We've got locations around Tacoma, down in Columbia Heights area, some parks, some rooftops of buildings. We are everywhere.